Hello, friends, and thank you for tuning in today. My name is Danya, and I'm so thrilled that you are here for the second part of this new podcast series called The Sutras of the Soul, what Patanjali's Yoga Sutras reveal about modern well being. In this episode, we are going to explore what is called the seed, the gateway to inner stillness. And before we jump into today's discussion, I would like to invite you to join me in taking a unified breath. So let's take a deep inhale through the nose and exhale out the mouth. Thank you so much. Let's begin. So before we jump into the first four sutras, I do want to make a note. In the last episode, I misspoke. I have been diving deeply into different mythos, and I accidentally shared the wrong birth story for Sage Patanjali. What I shared was that Patanjali was born from Anjaneya and Vayu, the deity of wind, and that is not correct. That is how Hanuman came to be, but the mythos of Patanjali is different. And so to start today's episode, I want to share the mystical story of Patanjali. So here it is, the mythical story of Patanjali as the snake incarnation. Patanjali is credited with compiling the Yoga Sutras, and it is often linked to a mystical and divine origin. Particularly in Hindu mythology, he is believed to be an incarnation of Adi Shesha, the cosmic serpent whom Lord Vishnu rests. Lord Vishnu is part of the Holy Trinity in the Hindu lineage, and Lord Vishnu is looked at as the preserver. So according to legend, Adi Shesha, the great serpent who supports the universe, noticed that Lord Vishnu would remain perfectly still in deep meditation. Yet sometimes his body would tremble. When Adi Shesha inquired about this, Vishnu explained, "I am enchanted by the cosmic dance of Lord Shiva. His divine movements are so profound that they shake the very fabric of existence." Inspired, Adi Shesha wished to learn the art of yoga and dance so that he too could experience this divine state. Lord Vishnu, seeing his deep devotion, blessed him with the opportunity to be born on earth as Sage Patanjali, where he would teach yoga and wisdom to humanity. It is said that Patanjali descended from the heavens as a tiny serpent and fell into the cupped hands of a devoted yogini named Gonika. Gonika, a great ascetic, was praying to the sun god for a worthy disciple before her time on earth ended. In response to her prayers, she received a divine vision, and as she scooped water into her palms, a tiny serpent fell into her hands and immediately transformed into a radiant baby boy. Realizing that this was a divine child, she raised him as her son, and he eventually became one of the great sages, compiling the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali to guide humanity on the path of self-realization. So the symbolism of Patanjali as a serpent brings about few important points. One is that as the cosmic serpent Adi Shesha is the foundation of the universe, the Yoga Sutras provide the foundational wisdom for yoga practice. Another is that snakes are symbolic for transformation and renewal, just as yoga leads to inner growth and awakening. And then the last one we talked about in our last episode, the coiled energy, also known as Kundalini, is represented by the coiled serpent. The coiled serpent is often associated with this Kundalini energy, which rises up the spine through disciplined yogic practice, and that is what eventually leads to enlightenment. Patanjali is often depicted with a human torso and multiple serpent hoods above his head, symbolizing wisdom and divine knowledge. There is often a coiled snake beneath him, representing stability and grounded wisdom, and this also is similar to Lord Vishnu. And then in his depictions, he's usually holding a variety of sacred objects, and it varies depending on the areas that you find these pictures in. But some of them are conch shells, which are symbols of cosmic vibration and sound. So this whole story of Patanjali reminds us that yoga is both a gift from the divine and a disciplined practice. Just as Adi Shesha sought to embody Shiva's dance, we too can use yoga as a means to transform ourselves, harmonizing body, breath, and mind on the path to enlightenment. Okay. So now that we have a little bit more understanding of this broad exploration of who Patanjali was, if they really were a person or a mystical entity or a gathering or a collection of teachers. And if you are keen to explore that topic further, I encourage you to go back to the first episode and listen to the foundation of this text, where it came from, when it was written, and the different theories behind it. I do want to note that I acknowledge that I made a mistake and am very much open to sharing that this is proof that I am not AI. I am not a robot. I am just simply a human who loves yoga and loves studying yoga. And I make mistakes often. And so I think that particularly for yoga teachers in our world and just people who are in love and passionate about different topics, we tend to put a lot of expectations on ourselves of being perfect. And this was a very public demonstration of how that is not always the case and the truth. So thank you for practicing patience with me and understanding. And I am really excited to go deeper into the sutras with all of you today. So coming back to today's episode, known as, again, the seed of the sutras. First four sutras are what are considered the seed of the entire text, which means that the entire text is literally contained within those first four verses. And then the rest of the text is just an expansion, or it's looked at as like the tree that sprouts from the seed. Before we dive deep into these sutras today, I want to encourage you to reflect on what yoga really means for you. There is this general accepted definition that this Sanskrit term yoga means connection, unity, so on and so forth. And I personally find that that is a very watered down explanation of the term, which is how most of Sanskrit terms are defined in our English language, because Sanskrit is a vibrational language and there's so much layers and meaning to the words that cannot just be captivated in one word definitions. It's not like an exact copy and paste from Sanskrit to English. And so we can take this a step further of like, okay, if it does mean union, what are we unifying? And, some people say, oh, it's the individual self to the cosmic self, or the lower self to the higher self, or personal soul to God consciousness, whatever way you want to take that. But what I would like to share with you is coming back to one of the sutras I shared in the last podcast, and that was Sutra 1.2, which we will talk about further today. The definition I shared with you is that yoga is the uniting of consciousness in the heart. That is a translation from Nishala Joy Devi in her translation of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And if we are basing our theory of what the term yoga means on that definition, then really what I find the term yoga to mean is a path to self-love. That this is an opportunity for us to learn more about who we are, to sit in the discomfort of our bodies and our minds, and grow a greater capacity for the entirety of our being. So I'd like to plant that seed with you before we dive deeper into these first four verses. And I encourage you to reflect on what the definition of yoga means to you. What really resonates with you from this practice? And that is a topic I would like to discover further in another episode, but I'll leave that there for now, and I'm excited to jump into these verses with you. The first four sutras are really the core essence of yoga. Each of these four sutras we will explore individually with the meaning, the modern relevance, and practical application. So Sutra 1.1, Atha Yoganushasana. Now the teachings of yoga begin. Atha is such a potent Sanskrit word, and again, there's so many layers and meanings to this term, but really it signifies readiness. So in that understanding, we can begin to think that yoga begins when we are present and open. There are some other translators out there, like Edwin F. Bryant, who goes on further to say that this sutra is also speaking to the significance of practicing in a community. That when we are practicing in community, other members tend to act as mirrors for us. And that is where true insights and wisdoms can come from, because a fish is not the first one to admit that they are wet. This sutra, again, we can understand that it's not just about learning and reading this text. It's truly about living the practice. And yoga is not something from the past or the future. It really is only in the present moment. present. What is happening right now, and how can you apply yoga right now? It's a pretty powerful statement to start a text with. It really encourages this idea of presence and awareness and focus and dedication. And so the modern questions come about, well, how often are we truly present in our lives? And can we notice the importance of commitment and intention in our practice? So to explore this sutra further for yourself, I encourage you to engage in a short grounding meditation, and we will do that here together. So wherever you are, simply close your eyes or soften your gaze and bring your awareness towards your breath. Notice the sensations of inhaling and exhaling through your nose. So as you inhale, can you feel the coolness of the air as it tickles your nostril hairs? And as you exhale, can you feel the warmth of the air tickling your upper lip? I encourage you to take a few deep breaths, focusing on those physical sensations every time you inhale and exhale. Beautiful. Coming back into this space, I invite you to recognize how you feel now from taking a few moments of really embodying your breath. The breath is such a potent tool, and Patanjali goes further and to describe how important this tool is in these sutras. But I find it is something that is often very much overlooked in our modern Western yoga practice. So thank you for taking a few intentional breaths with me, and know that that's a grounding practice that you can use whenever you need it. So moving on to Sutra 1.2. We talked about this in the last episode, and I'm excited to dive deeper into it with you now. Yogash chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind. Or, as I shared, the other translation from Nishala Joy Devi is that yoga is the uniting of consciousness in the heart. So this is probably the most famous sutra in this entire text, and it defines yoga beyond physical postures. This sutra is noting that the mind is constantly moving. And as I shared in our last episode, we can liken this to the waves on a lake. So really, yoga is the practice of stilling those waves so that we can see clearly. In a modern understanding, we can start to question and explore how our mental vrittis, which are the mind stuff or the fluctuations of the mind, shape our reality. So what lens are you looking at life through? And in our very modern context, we can apply this with an understanding of how social media, stress, and overthinking keep us from inner peace. And this is exactly where Raja Yoga, the path that Patanjali is talking about in the sutras, steps in. We are learning to work with the mind to empower ourselves and find inner peace, that inner joy, that constantly flowing wellspring. And so to explore this further, I would like to come back to our grounding practice. This time, I invite you to notice your breath. Coming back to those same physical sensations you brought your awareness to before. And as you are connecting deeper with your inhales and exhales, notice what happens to the mind. Maybe the mind already feels really agitated, and it's hard to stay connected to the breath. Maybe you can get a few full deep breaths in before the mind starts to waver. The practice of meditation is not one of stopping the thought. It is not controlling or restraining the thought. Our brains are beautiful entities. It literally took billions of years of evolution to have a human brain. We do not want to get rid of it. It can be a very potent tool to empower us from human doers to human beings. So can you notice the fluctuations of your mind without judgment? That is the practice of meditation. When you notice the thoughts arise, notice them, do not fight them, and then simply bring your awareness back towards your breath. This practice might be quite new for you, but the more you practice, the easier it will become. The brain is a muscle, just like every other muscle in our body. We can tone it, we can utilize it as a potent tool for our own well-being. Okay, so Sutra 1.3, Tara drashtuha svarupaya vashtanan. Then the seer abides in their true nature. So with this sutra, we can understand that when the mind is still, we experience our true essence. And in the yoga lineage, there is an understanding that our true essence is one of peace, clarity, and wholeness, the space of residing in love continuously. This sutra also shares that we are not our thoughts, but we are the awareness behind them. Many potent spiritual teachers and meditation teachers talk about this in the aspect of the witness. What or who is it that is witnessing your thoughts? Is there something beyond that? The sutra also points out that the goal of yoga is not to become something new, but instead to remember who we truly are. That we already have this awareness, this light within us, and we just need the time to slow down and remember that. So for a modern understanding, I encourage you to reflect on how often do we mistake our thoughts, labels, or emotions as our true self. We see this a lot in the English language. I am angry. I am sad. I have a bad leg. We take ownership, and those things become part of our identity. But who you are, what you are, is so much more than that. I love learning other languages. Instead of saying, I am sad, it's more common to say, I am experiencing sadness, or I am with sadness. And it's amazing how those simple language shifts can encourage a whole new perspective on life. My next reflection I would like to offer to you is how can we practice self-awareness and non-identification in daily life? So as you're going through your day, can you notice the thoughts, the labels, the emotions that you are taking on as your identity? And how can you step more into the role of the witness? To inquire into this even further, I invite you to reflect on this question. Who am I beyond my thoughts? And now Sutra 1.4, Vritti sarupyam itarata. Otherwise, we identify with the fluctuations of the mind. So this sutra is saying that when we don't practice awareness, we get caught in the storms of thoughts, emotions, and identities that may not be true. But as we have read in the previous sutras, yoga is the path to freedom from mental conditioning. We can rewire our perspectives, the lens in which we see the world through, by practicing and dedicating ourselves to the path of yoga. This is why mindfulness, meditation, and breathwork are so essential, because they break the cycle of unconscious identification. Many of these thought patterns are deeply rooted in the brain. Many of them are things that we have believed in since we were young. Maybe someone told us something once upon a time, and we took that on as part of our identity. The deeper rooted thought patterns are going to take the longest to uproot, but it can be done. All it takes is time and dedication. So coming back to Sutra 1.4, in a modern understanding, I encourage you to recognize when we are reacting versus responding to life. And how can you shift from identifying with stress and anxiety to witnessing them with awareness? And to practice this sutra a little bit deeper, I would like to offer a mantra to you. A mantra is another word in our society that has been again watered down. Mantras and affirmations are something different. An affirmation can be in any language, something like I am strong, I am enough, I am abundant. A mantra is specifically a phrase that's in Sanskrit, and these phrases mostly come from the ancient Vedic texts. And there is one mantra that I highly correlate with this awareness that is being brought about from Sutra 1.4, and that is the mantra Sat Nam. Sat means truth, Nam means name. Again, in a quick and dirty explanation. So the understanding is that when we are reciting the mantra Sat Nam, we are reciting truth is my name, that you are awareness and not identifying with thoughts, that you are finding the freedom from this mental conditioning or habitual thought patterns, that you are love and consciousness united in your heart and united with all of love and consciousness in the universe. So Sat Nam can be a really powerful practice. And now let's bring this all together, the seed of the Yoga Sutras. So again, as I said at the beginning of this podcast episode, these 4 sutras encapsulate the entire journey of yoga. The idea of readiness in Zen Buddhism, this is known as shashin, the beginner's mind, the ability for openness, eagerness, and readiness to learn. And in the first sutra, 1.1, it is encapsulated in that word atha, A-T-H-A, atha, readiness. And this relays that yoga begins now. The second sutra, Chitta Vritti Nirodha, shows the goal of yoga, that yoga really is the stilling of the mind. And as I shared before, this is not through restraint or control of the mind, but it can be a byproduct of your practice after a longer dedication and committed continual practice, which we talked about in the first episode, and we will dive deeper into in a further episode known as Abhyasa. The third sutra, Jashtua Svarupe Avashtanam, shows us what the true self is. So when the mind is still, we return to this essence. And then the fourth sutra, Vritti Sarupyam Itaratra, brings about this idea of identification. And when we forget who we truly are, what our essence is, we are trapped in the mind. So everything else, the next 192 verses in the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, simply expands on these 4 truths. I invite you to reflect and integrate what we have discussed today by answering these questions. Where am I identifying with my thoughts too much? And what practices help me reconnect with my true self? Thank you so much for tuning in today's episode. I'm excited to dive deeper into the mental fluctuations in the next part of this series, the Vrittis, and how they shape our experience. So stay tuned for that next share. If you enjoyed today's discussion, I invite you to explore our school's offerings through our website, www.wildsongyoga.com. We have many upcoming courses and continuing education opportunities, as well as our free Earth-Based Wisdom yoga course available. So thank you again so much. I would like to close out this discussion with one more unified breath. If you'd like to join me, let's take a deep inhale through the nose and exhale out the mouth. Thank you again so much. From my heart to yours, namaste.